Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, based on what time zone you're joining us for. Thank you for joining us today to hear about Muskoka Brewery's D365 implementation journey. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be sent to all participants at the end of this session. All participants are muted. However, we would love to answer your questions. Please ask your questions by typing them into the chat, and we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So with that being said, please allow me, next slide, please. Please allow me to introduce you to our panelists. My name is Asmita Sharma. I am a business development executive here with Spice Technology Group. I'm going to turn it over to Matthew Orozco and Andrew Warren, who are with Muskoka Brewery. Gentlemen, would you please go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Matthew Orozco, so I'm the controller at Muskoka Brewery. I was the lead on the finance side for the implementation and kind of co-leading this with Andrew.
Andrew, would you like to go ahead next?
Yep. Hi. Sorry, I didn't hear him cut there. So, my name is Andrew Warren. I am the lead IT at Muskoka Brewery. I've been with the company for a while. I've been pushing for an upgrade in our ERP system since probably around 2017, and I was kind of integral to making sure all the teams were kind of on task in the testing and development phases.
Thank you very much, guys. So Matthew and Andrew will be leading most of the presentation as they walk you through their journey and through their experience. But first, let me just take a few minutes to do a quick introduction to Spice Technology Group, who we are and sort of what we do in this market. So next slide, please. So Spice Technology Group there are two sides to the organization. One side to our organization is our solutions side, where we are focused on implementing cloud-based supply chain integration solutions across verticals such as retail, manufacturing, and distribution. The services side of the business is what we're focused on today. And on the services side, Spice is a Microsoft partner. And as a Microsoft partner, we implement, integrate, and support the D365 Business Central, as well as D365 finance and supply chain ERPs for organizations such as Muskoka Brewery. We also have expertise to support essentially the entire stack of Microsoft, including things such as Dynamics 365 CRM, the Power Platform, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. On the Microsoft D365 and Microsoft stack itself, we work with customers of all sizes, from mid-size organizations all the way to Fortune 500 large enterprises. Our focus areas are retail, distribution, healthcare, manufacturing, and logistics. And again, as I mentioned earlier, our capabilities extend not just to D365 ERP, which is the focus of this webinar, but the entire Dynamics platform, which also includes things such as CRM and the Power Platform, etc. We are a gold Microsoft partner. What we bring to the table is deep expertise in having done, many hundreds of implementations under our belt, deep experience in finance operations and supply chain, and a combination of an onshore and an offshore model, which ensures a budget-friendly project delivery for our customers. Next slide, please. So there's really three ways that we get involved with our customers, or I should say three primary ways. The first is a new implementation. So somebody is looking to migrate from, say, their existing ERP, they've outgrown it, or are just looking for something more modern in the cloud, etc. So we work with clients to do completely new implementations of Dynamics 365. We also help clients upgrade in certain cases where they may be on an older version, as you'll shortly hear from the folks at Muskoka, on an older version of a Microsoft ERP and are looking to move to Dynamics 365 Cloud. And then, of course, post-implementation support is a key part of the success of any ERP implementation. And so after the implementation, we also continue to work closely with our clients to provide post-implementation support. Any questions on this down the road, feel free to reach out to us directly and we'll be happy to answer them. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew and Matt so they can walk us through their D365 implementation journey. So can we have the next slide, please? And over to you, Andrew and Matt.
Thanks very much, Smita. My name is Andrew again. So here at Muskoka Brewery, we've been around since 1996. Gary McMullen and Kurt Evans opened the brewery in June of 1996. Started with a handful of employees, and we're now 100 employees strong. We are one of the top Ontario craft breweries. There's a couple that are at the top there, including Steam Whistle in Amsterdam. That are always kind of vying for that top spot. Our mission statement is very clear. We do tweak this a little bit every year, but we stay on point pretty much. But we are Muskoka Brewery. We're here to make our mark in beer and spirits, to make a difference in our communities, proudly crafting iconic Canadian experiences one glass at a time. That's who we are. Next slide, please. We are also nestled in Muskoka Brewery in Muskoka, so we're actually in Bracebridge, Ontario. So that's kind of in between Huntsville and Gravenhurst. Like I said, Gary and Kurt opened the brewery in '96. It is currently owned and operated by both Todd Lewin and Bob McDonald. Bob McDonald is the majority owner, and Todd Lewin is our president and co-owner. And this started as a very small team, and in around 2010 really started to grow quickly. And we are a team of passionate beer lovers that have no problem enjoying a beer on the patio on a Friday afternoon. So in short, we have a passion for beer, and we try to share that experience and that passion with other people. So next slide, please.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little background, kind of what system we were using before was. We're using a very old system, almost 15 years old, which is just very ancient by IT standards. And as Andrew mentioned, we really started growing back in like the early 2010s. And the system, we kind of just really outgrown what was being used at the time. It was a very antiquated system. It was based on a server. So we really had to be at the brewery to be able to use it, which now obviously doesn't really work that well with everyone still working a lot from home, stuff like that. We weren't able to use all the features there. And then when we were setting up, we had really limited the setup to just a few key features. And it was mainly just on the accounting side. So essentially just having a GL, we'd enter our sales in there, and then any journal entries, stuff like that. We were using a lot of Excel spreadsheets, do a lot of tracking, stuff like that, our financial statements, POs, inventory counts. Essentially, everything was in Excel, and it was just very minor on the system side there. So for our upgrading, we did a little business case to help us get out and upgrade the system. So one of the main points was Microsoft was no longer going to support NAV 2009. So that really forced us to start putting this on the front and gain a new system in place. In addition, it was just taking a lot of time. It was very inefficient. Even just pulling like a standard accounts receivable or AR or AP report or a lot of different reports, it could take 4 or 5 hours to pull just a simple report on there. And then a lot of tracking. We didn't know when inventory would come in or what we would be brewing. So just a lot of communication, a lot of duplicate work on that side that was needed. So it was just very inefficient, taking a lot of time and wasn't allowing us much flexibility to the way we were operating now or in the future. Next slide.
Yeah, so why did we go to Microsoft and D365 and why did we choose Spice? Well, there was a lot of different factors involved. So first thing is that we built a business case and we reached out to 3 partners when we initially started looking, and then a 4th one kind of came in afterwards. So we were looking at SAP as well as Dynamics. And as well as some brewery specific software, but some of the brewery specific software was actually built off of SAP or Dynamics anyway. So, you know, it wasn't proprietary. So even though we were utilizing it, we wouldn't actually own any of those bolt-ons or add-ons or anything like that. So that was very important to us. We wanted to make sure that, you know, if we're going to customize and create a system that's good for us, we want to be able to make sure that if we ever had to change partners for whatever reason, that we were able to maintain that software and keep using it no matter what. So we ended up getting a reference to referrals, I should say, to Spice. And quite honestly, since the first meeting, we kind of really knew in the back of our mind that this was going to be our partner. Being a gold standard partner was definitely at the front of our minds. So we wanted to make sure if we had any issues with our software, we had a direct connection to Microsoft, and Spice was kind of that party that would be able to do that. So, and on top of that, the costs were actually extremely reasonable for us, and in comparison to well, especially to SAP, but other brewery-specific softwares that were actually a lot more to implement than D365 was. We also looked at options of going on-prem or cloud on-prem, which would be an on-prem service utilizing Azure Cloud. So that's, even though it's using Azure, it's technically an on-prem service. So 2018 is an on-prem service, but you could install it on Azure and you would be able to use it in the cloud. So that was an option. However, I think just to keep things as simple as possible without needing additional servers and costs, we went through to D365 Business Central. It kept the logins, the Active Directories down to a minimum, and people are able to log in from home whenever they want or on site. It doesn't really matter. Where we live in rural Muskoka, or sort of like where the brewery is located, we experience a lot of power outages. Before, if the power went out, nobody would be able to work on our ERP system. Now with Business Central, we don't have to worry about that. If the power goes out at the brewery, if users have power at home, then they can just go home and continue working. So that's kind of the full cycle of how we kind of got into Microsoft and why we chose Spice. So we can get the next slide, please. So budgeting this, we've actually chose to do this in 3 phases. Phase 1, which was the most significant time and resources put into it. So we started in September of 2020 to focus on phase 1, and that also included planning for phase 2. So we did planning of phase 1 and phase 2 right away in September. And then we started to really dig into and develop and customize the phase one features. So we wanted to make sure that not everybody and all of our team members were being sucked up into this for their day-to-day, because we were using a team that was still having to manage their day-to-day, which is our purchasing department, our finance department, our inside sales department. All these people still needed to do their normal work, as well as learn a new system essentially and test it and go from there. So doing this in phases really helped us spread that out. And then once we get into phase two, then so all of our setup and our development work is already done. It's more or less just going in and testing it to make sure it's doing what we're doing, and then away we go. And phase three is more or less our tap room or our retail store and our online store. So phase three isn't actually necessarily really tied to phase one and two. It's just going to be getting a better software system and reporting and inventory tracking for our tap room versus what we're using now. So that's the three phases that we've decided to do that. Next slide, please.
Yeah. So we created a project team to manage the implementation of the new system, and this was led by the finance team, as we were the ones that would be most impacted by it, and we also were the ones that had the most knowledge of ERP systems. So a lot of the other team members at the brewery don't have much background or information to be able to just general knowledge of how ERP systems work, along all that kind of stuff. So we did kind of say we wanted to have one expert in each department that was going to be that for each department, and then they would be the change managers to help implement the change on each team, because we didn't want to have 100 different voices to talk and it would just get all mumbled up. So we had a few key leads, and each one would manage the departments. They would go out and say, okay, what did you want to see? What worked well? What didn't? What could we improve? All that kind of stuff. Kind of just generally what they saw, just any pain points with the current system. And then that was all kind of fed up. And we just discussed and helped identify where the priorities are, what we could learn from that. Next slide.
Yeah, so our experience with the implementation was, we can break this into three groups here. So our internal prep was actually, I'm going to say around 2 years long. It didn't need to be. It was just that we went through a bit of change at the brewery with persons and resources. So that's the only reason why it was so long. But once we had our ducks in a row, we met with the stakeholders. We didn't necessarily need buy-in, but we wanted to make sure they knew what we were doing. Our stakeholders were on board for getting a new system and getting new reporting and getting tools better, so that way they can make decisions better and faster. So we wanted to make sure that they knew exactly what we were doing, and we got around to not necessarily a buy-in, but an approval from them. Once we started in September, we were working with a remote offshore team. So Gaurav and his team were exceptionally aware or forgiving with their time. So there was a time difference that they would be up until midnight their time, but it would be around 1 p.m. our time. So they were very what's a good word for that? Just very, very giving of their time for that. So they made it work, we made it work, and we ended up doing a bunch of meetings for the first month, probably 3 or 4 days in a row of 6 or 7 hours. So their team was very strong and very helpful. So then afterwards, once we got implemented, the change management, which was brought forward by the leads of each department, was then funneled through, I'll call it a communication liaison from our team, and we would make sure that got to development partners, and they would make those changes accordingly, and then testing would be done on that. So that's kind of how our implementation went. Next slide, please.
So in doing the implementation and stuff, we did learn quite a few lessons, kind of what we would do differently next time. The first one and the biggest one is just doing a lot more tests, and you just want to make sure you've tested everything. You want to test a few different scenarios, make sure it's all working correctly, see if there's anything that could pop up down the line. It's kind of difficult, but the more testing you do, it will save you headaches down the line on that. And
Yeah,
just make sure.
Sorry, Matt, I'm just going to jump in on that one. The
Yep.
one thing that I would say the biggest learning was that is also not just actually testing as a team, but making sure other users do full testing at the same time. So a good example would be Matt and I, we know how the system works, and we would test how we think it was going to work. However, there's going to be a user, let's say in the warehouse that that does something that we may not have been aware of. And then if they test it after we go live, we could run into some issues there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then just make sure you got a lot of documentation on who did the testings, what scenarios, all that, just to make sure you've covered everything there. Next one is documentation. Just make sure it's better to do some documentation beforehand, create some processes, stuff like that. It's a little easier while it's still fresh in your mind than right after the fact, trying to just update a little documentation as you go. So project time, we were a little unusual. It was a little unusual for us because we did implement the project kind of during once COVID was starting to hit. So a lot of learning was happening, just even how to do just remote working from there. So we did it over 7 to 8 months, and it could have been a little shorter, but we always felt just make sure you give enough time, probably budget a little more than what you need to, just to make sure if there's any hiccups or any problems that come up, because there will be, that you do have the time to be able to identify and address and resolve the issue before going live on there. Next one is change management. As Andrew was kind of mentioning a little earlier, is all people kind of have buy-in. You will get there is usually some resistance to some change, but it is to help. You just need to kind of help show them, okay, yeah, change is going to be implemented, but there should be some pauses that they see that they might just be focusing on the negatives, and it's really the project manager on that, or the project lead on that team, really should help them see the positives and how it's going to actually improve their day-to-day operations on that side. And then budgeting is make sure you have a list of all your items that you need to see, and then what you'd like to see, and then low priority, and just kind of identify, okay, these are the priority items, these need to be done, and then see how it works with your budget. And then if there's anything left over, kind of tackle after the fact on there. And not everything has to be done right on the first implementation. You can delay stuff and do like a second phase or third phase or even more if are needed on that side. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we did experience quite a few benefits on this. As part of doing the new ERP system, we did kind of do like a whole top-down overview of all the systems, our controls that were in place. We kind of approached it we want to kind of approach it a little fresh. Like, this might have been what we've been doing for the last 10 years or so, but is that the best way to look at it? Is there something more efficient? Is it the safest way to go about it? So as part of this, we did overhaul the chart of accounts just because we did a lot of growing and stuff. We had old accounts that weren't valid, and we just created a new chart of accounts. We added dimensions and stuff there to help all the different areas that we want to do, and it allows us to grow with the chart of accounts as well. A big thing was just data pull from the system is so much faster now. Like, we are able to pull reports in seconds versus, I mentioned earlier, it could take 5 hours, and that was assuming the system wouldn't kick you out for whatever reason. And you would have to start back over, and it always happened. The last 89% was done on there. And then, yeah, we just kind of reviewed the whole overall systems. We made some changes that just helped put some controls in place, just from internal control point of view on there.
Yeah, and then then we started looking at what our future capabilities are going to be. So we're developing a roadmap and timelines as to when we want to start activating stuff. So some of this stuff is already done. So inventory tracking and costing in the system. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a budget in the system ready to go for October. And then part of our business is that we actually do reforecast every month. So part of that is going to be once we have that set up in the system, that the AI feature will actually help us shape our forecast based off of trends and in the market. So if we have a budget of 50,000 hectoliters and we had an exceptionally peak couple months, then maybe that budget or it needs to reforecast to 55,000. So you know, we want to make sure that we're using all of the features to actually help us make better decisions, and it's not left to just a gut. So the data is actually there to help you do that. Power BI has been phenomenal. So we actually had our volume report put into BI, and so now you can not only pull that report and it's instant and updating every hour, that you know, you've got some visuals to help you understand that data better. So Power BI and the whole Power Suite, Power Automate and Power Flows are very beneficial to making sure that people get data when they want it. And as I said about the AI features for forecasting, then we also want to put that into our cash management and cash flow. So there's a very great tool that's part of Business Central that will actually give you a cash flow analysis. There is some setup to be done, but again, it's a very powerful tool. Then we wanted to make sure that we were linking to other systems. So Business Central is becoming very, very, very versatile. And there's a lot of companies that are creating connectors. You do have to be careful with the connectors. A lot of them, if you start getting a lot of connectors, you're going to be spending a lot of money monthly just on those connectors. So, you know, we want to make sure that we have the right ones in place, and that our team is utilizing them to their full benefits. So something like a CRM, you may have an external CRM that's not Microsoft. You're going to need a connector for that, and you'll pay monthly. But again, so we wanted to make sure that systems are linking, and you know, as little connectors as possible is what we're hoping for. Next slide, please. And that's it. So we will take some Q&As. So
thank you very much, guys. Yeah, do we have any questions that the folks can answer? Bill? Okay, let me see if I can do this here.
Hi, Smita.
Okay, sorry, I can just, I can read some of the questions. Sure. So one of the questions that we have was, and Matthew and Andrew, feel free to answer or, you know, demur. One of the questions is, what was your total budget for the ERP?
So we're not done yet. We didn't really actually set a budget. What we kind of did was we were given a quote, and we kind of built a budget off that quote. So I wouldn't say that we actually had a budget. Esmita, you were kind of part of that process. I think that was more aligned as to what happened, rather than actually giving a. We didn't really give you a budget. You gave us a quote.
That's correct. Kind of yeah. So absolutely, I can take that up, Andrew. You know, without talking about specific numbers, the way the process worked in this, you know, in this scenario with Muskoka Brewery is, they had a very detailed list of requirements to begin with, because they had already been speaking to some other implementation partners, and had gotten to that stage. And we basically used that list of requirements to provide an estimate of what we saw as implementation cost and implementation timelines to implement the items that were on their list of requirements. And I'm happy to say that we've been pretty close, both in terms of timeline and our initial estimate in terms of cost. So, we're very happy that we were able to deliver that. I'm sure Muskoka Brewery is as well.
Yeah, I mean, we did, like, I mean, it's not cheap. So, I mean, I would tell you, I can honestly tell you that it was over 100 grand. So, again, the investment that you're putting into it is, there's no comparison to it.
Yeah, and it's kind of, each approach is very different just because our needs would be different from anyone else's needs. We had some customization features that were done that were kind of specific to what we were looking for, just the way we operated. So it is kind of, it's hard to give like this scenario would be for this cost or something.
Yeah.
Maybe I can answer this question this way. This is Asmita Sharma with Spice again. I can just sort of answer generally by saying that most of the implementations for Dynamics 365 Business Central that we do range from somewhere around the $90,000 to $150,000 mark. That's sort of a very good ballpark for cost of full implementation of an ERP. With Spice, again, that cost tends to be lower because we do utilize a lot of offshore resources, and we're able to then take advantage of offshore rates, which are typically a good 30 to 50% lower than onshore rates. One more question. Did you have to hire additional staff during the implementation stage?
So we didn't hire additional staff, but we probably should have. Like I said, so our team was running really thin. They have their day-to-day to do, and then there's, organizing and trying to, write out what their processes are and how their day-to-day works in Business Central, which was a little time-consuming. We probably had too many meetings to take them away from their day-to-day. But yeah, we probably should have had, hired at least one person, maybe for at least on the finance side to handle that, because again, our finance team was running thin. Everything was already being done outside the system as it was. And then you're asking your team to work 8 hours and try to fit in writing out processes in that time.
But it was also, it was mainly just a few key people that were putting in some extra hours. Just the way we operated was like, just because I can speak really from the finance side, was there was a few people that weren't too impacted. It was just more just giving feedback, answering questions, kind of like that stuff. They would be helping a few implementations, few specific stuff. But it was a few key people, like Andrew and I were putting a lot more hours than what other people were.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that the hard thing about hiring additional people, if you're going to do an implementation, is that they really don't know your business process. So, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Yeah, you need to get some more help and resources, but at the same time, they may not know what you're trying to accomplish. So, we probably should have hired somebody, but it would have to been done months prior to being started.
Okay, thank you, guys. Kapil, do we have any other questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute. One of the questions that came up is, can you please speak to the change management process and any thoughts or lessons learned?
Sure, Matt, I can take that one. I was kind of at the front of that. So, the way that it happened was that we kind of, we were given a document to fill out and explain how our processes work. Whereas Gurov and his team, they would come back and let us know how it would work in Business Central. If we kind of agreed with it, we would say yes. If we didn't agree with it, we would have to have more discussions about how we actually want it to work. Then they would say this is the way it needs to be done. Again, we'd go yes if this is the way we want it. No, we need to have more chat. We need to have more conversations about that. I think there was only our returns process kind of went back and forth that many times, but other than that, it was, it was pretty straightforward. But then it was, once we got into the testing, then there was more change management needed. So although on paper, the process looks great, but once you start actually actioning it in Business Central, then you're going to be like, well, no, I think we need to do this a better way. So again, user acceptance testing is where your process is going to either pass or fail. So as long as your users are passing the processes and actually doing the processes, then you'll have a successful implementation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we'll take one last question if we have one. Otherwise, we are.
If you can squeeze in two, let's make it quick.
Sure.
Something which
Okay.
Vadim asked as well. We're talking about stories about ERP implementations that have gone wildly over the budget. How did you do compared to your original budget, and do you have any thoughts on how to avoid going over budget?
So we were actually, for our phase one, we were bang on. We did spill over. Actually, once we went live, we were actually short of budget, but we ate that up pretty quick in our first month of support. As Matt pointed out earlier, there was some stuff that wasn't necessarily good to go for go live. So we had some additional work built after the fact, and then we were kind of right on budget. For a project like this to go wildly out of control, you would need to absolutely not know any processes that your company does at all, and you'd be learning them as you go. That would be the only way that you could really get out of control. Or you pick a software and then you change it halfway through that you want to go to a different software, because then you're back to square one. So again, once you've kind of outlined your processes, then all you're doing really is talking them through. I know the team, they developed everything that we wanted, so we were pretty clear with them as to exactly what we wanted, and that's what we got.
Thank you, Andrew. It's very similar to what Matt said in the presentation, that just know your processes very well.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. Last question. How much time did each one of your teams have to spend on the project? Just trying to understand, how did you manage your regular job versus the new project at hand?
No, that's a good question. And that was actually our concern going into the project, was how we were going to have people manage it. And we really wanted to know, and we asked the question a lot to Smita and her team, that what is expected from us before we started phase one, and it was really good. So my time was probably I'm going to say 80% ERP, and then 20% brewery maintenance, IT maintenance, I should say, which was called the day-to-day stuff. But my time was it spilled over into the evening quite a bit. So really it was probably 80 plus 40. So Matt Horosco's time was probably pretty close to that. So he was still trying to, run the finance department at the same time. So, so for your leads should be dedicated leads, and that's going to be where all your resources are put in for the day-to-day for the employees. So, we had one particular person on finance that was she's kind of integrated to every single department. So she's our AP and AR coordinator. So she was kind of on the calls for everything. So that took up a lot of her day. And some days we would have 2-hour sessions in the morning, and then 2-hour sessions in the afternoon. So as you can see, that right there is basically the full day. So and then once we got into the user acceptance training, the actual training, and then the user acceptance documents, then, you know, same thing. There was 2 hours in the morning and then 2 hours at night. So that's kind of how that went. So the first month, it was pretty chaotic. That was all of September. As we got into October and the development work was getting done, so we had a 2-week kind of breathable time, so that way our development partners could actually build the system for us. Then we got into training, so 2 hours morning, 2 hours at night, and we did that twice a week until December. But it wasn't the same group. So one group would be finance the 1 week, or for 2 weeks. Then the next 2 weeks would be inside sales, and the 2 weeks after that would be operations, and that's how we did it. So again, Matt and I had to be at every single one of those calls, but the rest of the team did not.
Got it. Thank you, Andrew. Much appreciated. Asmita, I know we are short on time. I do have a few more questions, but we'll leave that to some other time. Any last thoughts before we conclude?
Andrew, Matt?
Yeah, I'll just say that I don't think I can emphasize this enough, is user acceptance training. Do it as much and as possible. Don't even proceed until your users have actually physically tested and have actually physically approved it. You're going to feel like a babysitter at sometimes, but honestly, it just makes things so much smoother. And it just, the project will be so much better that way, and your go live will be so much better. Yeah,
and I echo that thought. That's one of the main things, and the other one is really just understanding the business, understanding your processes, and understanding kind of what you need to succeed and what you can kind of change in the system. And that's more just like the first step is just understanding what's needed and what's required.